it's gonna be the day we start living in the new world.
Hola, it's Ivy. Really excited to share with you a little bit about my night tonight. I just got home from the annual Sentinel Health Awards, which is put on every year by the Hollywood and Health Society. And it's to reward television shows for accurate portrayal of health messaging in the media, in their content. And it was so inspirational to me to see how dedicated these writers are to portraying health accurately to get the message out to the public, whatever that message happens to be, whether it, in one instance tonight, we saw a show that portrayed a rape and the aftermath of a rape, and portraying that accurately uh, obviously has huge impacts on society and huge impacts on the victims and the way they approach it, as well as their families and loved ones. Another example was another show took a look at the effects of a child with Asperger's disease and how that impacted the family life and how that impacted the child. There was another show where an elderly woman had Alzheimer's, and it just highlighted the way she handled that and the whole trajectory of her illness and how it impacted her life, and documenting her relationships with her doctors and the conflicts and the challenges. And I was just blown away by the complexity of these issues and the commitment of these television writers to handle it in a responsible and accurate way, because it's really not their responsibility. We expect people to have this high level of integrity, but when you think about it, they're hired to entertain us. And so it was just so beautiful to me to see people who went to the trouble to bring in experts, really research these issues, and portray them in accurate ways to help society deal with these really critical issues. And one of the shows, one of the topics that was really close to my heart was one particular show that won an award. I'm not going to mention it because I'm going to do a little bit of a critique here. And it portrayed a birth in a developing nation. And this happens to be an issue which, as you know, is very close to my heart as a birth doula. And so I want to kind of run through the scenario and use it to highlight a couple of the big myths out there around childbirth and what the actual truth is. So myth number one is that the C-section is the safest way to have a baby. This is a huge, huge myth. It is true that doctors oftentimes will resort to C-sections because of liability issues, because if they perform a C-section, technically they can say they did everything in their power to get the baby out. But the reality is that the United States has one of the highest infant mortality rates in the developed world and one of the highest maternal death rates in the developed world. And the research shows the main reason for this is the ginormous C-section rate we have in this country. In California alone, it's at 40%. And this is just unconscionable. The World Health Organization recommends no higher than 10% C-section rate. And truly, they state, the research shows that it really shouldn't be medically indicated in more than 1% of cases. So thank God we have C-sections when they are truly necessary to save the baby and save the mother. But this is only 1% of the time. And what we're not told is that the rest of the time, to birth naturally is really, or to birth vaginally, is really the safest way to go for mother and baby. And in this particular clip, in this particular scene, this television scene that won an award tonight, the doctor came in to this scene where the mother was delivering her baby with a midwife, and she had come to the birth center because this community was encouraged to bring the births to the birth center for safety purposes, which I totally support, because we don't want needless deaths happening. And again, thank heaven we have Western medical interventions when necessary. But this woman was there at the birth center birthing with her midwife. Western medical doctor came in and recommended a C-section. And the reason she gave was that the woman wasn't progressing, which you'll hear a lot in hospitals. And that's a very general, vague thing. And a lot of times the criteria for what progressing enough means to, according to hospital criteria, is really not realistic when it comes to natural childbirth. And the reason this particular doctor gave in this scene was that the woman had been in labor too long, wasn't progressing, and what she was kind of arguing back and forth with the mother who was, wanting to have her baby naturally. And she said, well, didn't you start labor yesterday? Now, just because she started labor yesterday doesn't mean she wasn't progressing. And they did not show in the show anything about how far along the woman was in terms of her dilation. So to just put that out there as if just because you've been laboring a day, you're not progressing, I was a little disappointed by that. I feel like, we need to be showing that in reality, birth can take several days. You can have a woman in pre-labor walking around, making love with her husband if the bag of waters hasn't broken, of course. Sleeping through periods where maybe there's a lull in the progression, and of course this is not always safe. Of course we want to get the baby out in somewhat of a timely way, but just because you've labored a day doesn't mean you need a C-section. And I felt like that was an area that wasn't quite true to the realities of what's necessary for a healthy birth. So the second gripe I had with this particular instance was it was an issue of shoulder dystocia. And that means that basically the baby's shoulder was stuck as it was coming out. And the doctor came in and was saying, I'm going to do it my way. And the midwife was saying, well, I'm going to do it my way. And she had a rebozo, which is a big scarf that in traditional cultures in Latin America and in other places around the world, they use this giant scarf. They kind of harness it around the mother's body to maneuver the baby and to kind of get the baby to move. And that can be a wonderful way to ease the baby down the birth canal. But the doctor clearly didn't know anything about what was going on with the rebozo and was just saying, well, I'm going to do it my way. And she did her own intervention, which worked, and that's fantastic that worked. But I would have liked to see the traditional culture being honored in some way, or at least I feel like Western medical doctors should at least have some type of training in these natural methods, which can be very effective at times. And I would really like to see a world where we bring the best of Western modern medical knowledge along with the best of these traditional methods, and then we're going to have the greatest chance of the best outcomes for mothers and babies all around the world and in this country right here, right now. So last but not least, the third thing that happened, they finally got the baby out, and the doctor immediately took this knife that the midwife was going to use to cut the umbilical cord. And in this particular culture that was being documented, whoever cuts the umbilical cord is the godmother. And so the midwife had intended to cut the umbilical cord and become the godmother. But the doctor, just on automatic pilot, grabbed the knife, cut the umbilical cord. And there's nothing wrong with this per se. But again, it's just one of those taken for granted notions in Western medicine that we need to cut the cord right away. And this simply isn't the case. As a matter of fact, if we allow the cord to stop pulsating on its own before we cut it, that gives the baby a much greater blood supply. I can't remember the exact percentage, but it's something like 60% of the baby's blood volume is in the placenta at the time of birth. And so when the cord is still pulsing, that's blood coming from the placenta into your baby's bloodstream. So to clamp the cord immediately and cut it before the cord has stopped pulsing, you're kind of robbing your baby of all of that extra blood that is really important for its vitality to get its life started out on the strongest footing possible. So that was another thing that I just kind of wish, well, in general, I wish that doctors would be more conscious of the fact that, yes, that is their training, but there are other ways, and it's not necessarily in the best interest of the baby to do it that way unless there's some other circumstance. For example, a lot of times parents will opt to have the cord clamped and cut immediately to bank the cord blood, and that's totally up to the parents if that's the way they want to go with that. Um, but also, how can we expect television to portray this messaging if the medical community is still doing practices that are not evidence-based? So more so than a critique on the show itself, I'm sort of just using it as an opportunity to say, hey, to all the doctors out there, let's work on changing the protocol so that parents are informed that you actually can wait several minutes until the cord stops pulsing before you clamp and cut. And it would be great if we could show that on TV. That would just get the message out that much sooner. But it's all a process, and I'm really grateful for this particular show's writers for making the effort to portray birth in the best light possible, to get some of the good messages out there. One thing I was really happy about with this particular episode was that they did show a developing country and the way that the birth is done there. They showed a vertical birth, so the mother was upright, which is a great way to have a baby because you are actually using the help of gravity to bring the baby down. And the doctor didn't do a C-section, which was really beautiful. She respected this woman's preference. She respected this woman's choice. She stood back. She let the woman birth. Again, when the baby was shown to have shoulder dystocia, she could have used that as a reason to do a C-section, but she didn't. Instead, she did a manual maneuver that got the baby out. So I might be nitpicking here with my issues of, she could have waited a few minutes to cut the cord. She could have, not suggested a C-section immediately, but progress, not perfection, right, guys? And overall, I'm just so inspired and so impressed by the dedication of these writers, and so excited that we even have an event like this to honor the writers and the producers that make an effort to put accurate health messaging out there in the media on their shows and incorporate that into mainstream entertainment so that we can all learn something while we're vegging out in front of the tube. So I really hope you've enjoyed everything I've had to say today. Please let me know what you think. I always welcome your comments and feedback. And if you like this and you want to pass it around, I'd be so grateful if you share it with your friends on social media. Have a wonderful night or day whenever you're watching this. And be sure to join me next time in a new world.
Start living in the new